As well as the new features of the X3, in this video I'm going to be talking about stitching, battery, audio, accessory compatibility, comparisons with the One X2 and lots more along the way, so let's get straight to it. The biggest feature for me is the new design of the X3 body, and I have to talk about that first because it's a major upgrade and it makes all the new features of the X3 so much easier to use. The most obvious thing here is the screen. It's huge with a diagonal measurement of 2.29 inches, which is pretty much the same size as a GoPro screen. The screen is really impressive and is intuitive to use with a simplified menu. The structure will be familiar to those used to Insta360 cameras and it will be easy to navigate for new users. And most importantly, every part of the menu system and the camera mode icons are super responsive and super smooth, and they're also really easy to see outside. And what really adds to how slick this new design is that the camera now has haptic feedback. So with most swipes of the screen you get a subtle vibrate that goes with it. Push and hold the screen and you go into panoramic mode, which is a 360 viewing mode, so you can swipe around the entire 360 image. And of course the 360 capability is ultimately why you would buy this camera. You can shoot first and point later, and you don't have to think about where you position the camera because it captures everything and keeps the selfie stick invisible in the process. So you can create those magical third person and drone style shots. Surprisingly though, the 360 video size is still 5.7K, and this hasn't changed now since the original One X came out in 2018. The sensor size is bigger than the One X2 at 1/2 an inch, and that's compared to the 1/2.3 inch sensor of the One X2. So it's not a huge jump in sensor size. And I went down a huge rabbit hole when I was looking into sensor sizes, so do feel free to correct me on my figures in the comments below. Only a month ago we saw the release of the 1 inch 360 edition of the One RS, so that would have set a certain expectation for a lot of people. One thing that we have to remember is that this is a pocket friendly 360 action camera, and I would only want the larger specs in a camera like this if it didn't compromise the camera's size. Having said that, the X3 is slightly bigger than the One X2. It has a slightly thicker body and weighs 30 grams more at 179.9 grams. Even though the 360 video resolution hasn't increased, interestingly there is an 8K 360 time-lapse feature on the X3. And I assume with the time-lapse mode that the camera is shooting less footage, so requires less processing. And for those that like the bullet time effect, you can now shoot bullet time at higher frame rates of 4K at 120 frames per second and 3K at 180 frames per second. There's now a separate button on the side of the camera which gives you access to preset favourite menus where you can store 6 of your preferred camera setups. And on the other side of the camera I have to mention, look, there is a proper USB door on a little hinge. So we can say goodbye to that USB door that used to hang on that annoying plastic thread. The record button is underneath the screen here, and next to that is the single lens mode button. We did see the single lens mode on the One X2, but this new screen on the X3 makes the single lens mode so much more practical to use. You can actually frame your shot properly using the screen, and what you see on the screen is pretty much what you get. So press this button once and it switches to the camera facing you, press it again to film away from you, and press it once more to go back to shooting in full 360 mode. The really cool thing here though is the resolution of the single lens mode, as you can now shoot 4K video at 30 frames per second and 3.6K video at 60 frames per second. So if you know the exact shot you want to shoot and you don't want the extra work in reframing, then the single lens mode is a really good option and the quality is really impressive. You can also use the single lens mode for photos with a resolution of 36 megapixels, and this is useful while you're filming to quickly take a photo instead of getting your phone out. But for me it's just an added bonus because, as probably with most of you, I would usually use my phone for photos. There is a new feature called Me Mode as well, which uses AI to help you frame your shot so you don't have to. Even though it's under the single lens mode, it actually uses the bottom half of each lens, so you have to put the camera out in front of you like you're in 360 mode. And the AI will frame you in the middle of the shot and the selfie stick will be invisible, and the video is ready to go straight away with no reframing necessary. And with Me Mode there is no editing option here and no ability to reframe because it's all about me, and it will be about you when you get your camera, but it's still called Me Mode, but you get the point. I love shooting and reframing 360 photos, and the X3 takes 72 megapixel 360 photos. So the detail is incredible and gives you a lot more flexibility with reframing whilst retaining resolution. And when you jump into the app with these photos, there are a number of preset AI modes that turn your 360 photos into mini animated videos. And while we're in the app, there's also a new AI editing mode for any short clips with walking, cycling or any similar movement. Simply select Auto and the AI will automatically edit several short videos from your one clip. I used this with a 1-minute clip and it gave me a number of short edits and was really fast to do. The X3 has 4 microphones and 3 audio settings, and this mode that you're hearing right now is stereo mode. And this is wind reduction mode, and it's actually quite a good test for the X3 today because there's about 15-20 mile an hour gust of wind. The stitching overall from the X3, as you can see in this video, is generally really good. There are no distorted hands, but the selfie stick handle does show more than I would expect, and this was only a 1.2 meter selfie stick. I am using a beta version of the camera firmware and the studio app, so hopefully this will improve with the official release. I pushed the stitching a bit more in these shots just to see how it compared to the One X2. Both cameras, as expected, have stitched the mosaic really well. Towards the edges you can see the One X2 has struggled and the X3 has a pretty clean stitch line throughout. Looking at the image quality, the X3 has retained a lot more detail of the mosaic here as well. On a short selfie stick, the stitching is marginally better with the X2, and on a longer selfie stick, the X2 has done a much better stitch with less selfie stick showing. Comparing the images, the X3 holds on to more detail on the clouds and more noticeably more detail on the summer house roof tiles. Obviously that was just one image comparison, and I will be doing a more in-depth video soon which will compare the One X2 with the X3 in more detail. The X3 also has active HDR, which means you can keep the camera moving while shooting with a higher dynamic range. So this mode helps you to retain more detail in the brighter and the darker parts of your shots. Battery runtime and overheating are always of interest when a new camera gets released, and the battery in the X3 is 1800 mAh and I recorded on it continuously for 1 hour 33 minutes. It stops recording before the battery goes completely dead, and this is actually a really good feature and it prevents any loss or damage to files while you're recording. And when I say that the recording was continuous, the camera does break the files into 30-minute segments. So there's a gap in between each 30-minute file while the camera stops recording and then starts recording again. So you do lose a few seconds of footage. The battery capacity and the recording runtime on the X3 is actually really good, but it's about the same as the One X2, even though the X3 battery has about 10% more capacity, so I assume it's just working harder. In practical real life terms, I spent the whole day at a theme park and shot on every ride that I went on, and the battery lasted all day. And most importantly, the camera didn't overheat in any of the tests I did. I used a 128GB card, which gives you around 2 hours 15 minutes of record time shooting at 5.7K, and the highest capacity card that the camera can use is 1TB. Even though the physical design of these cameras looks very similar, there are a lot of accessories from the One X2 that aren't compatible with the X3. Because of the minor variations in dimensions, the battery from the X2 can't be used with the X3, and also the dual charger can't be used. The lens cap from the One X2 is a bit tight on the X3 because of the thicker body, so it'd be advisable to get the new X3 lens cap. You also need to buy a new external mic adapter and a quick reader due to the redesign of the USB socket. You can still use the Ulanzi PT20 invisible mic bracket for the Rode Wireless Go though. The Ulanzi cage and the premium lens guards are also not compatible. The X3 redesign is a huge upgrade to the One X2, and Insta360 have packed a ton of features into this tiny action camera, and they've kept the price really competitive. I know a lot of you would have expected 8K with a 1-inch sensor, so is this enough of an upgrade for you? Let me know in the comments. My name's Rich, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.